We welcome you all back, and before we go much further, I see David Campton there just taking off his jacket, and I want to say thank you for yesterday evening and for there you are. Thank you to you and to those who worked with you, David. And we could see that there was a huge amount of preparation went into that, thought-provoking, informative, and so on. And we really did appreciate it. And it was lovely for us to get out around the city, a city that I haven't walked in for years, for one reason or another. But thank you sincerely for all that you did there. And this morning we want to thank Johnny and Gillian and all the others who were involved in this morning's programme as well. And once again for enabling us to listen to the Holy Spirit and allowing the Holy Spirit to bring us further along on our journey with our Lord. So really appreciate that, and obviously the listening that went on beforehand. In terms of the preparation that went into that. So thank you so much for that. Secretary.
Mr. President, just to bring one resolution to allow us to proceed this afternoon. It's number 1 on the order paper, which is a list of people who are not members of conference but for whom we're seeking permission to speak. So number 1 on the order paper, and I move that, sir.
Are we all agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Thank you. And we now have another video as we can have another period of the conversation on the work of God. So we'll watch a video now from World Development and Relief.
Through the Methodist Church in Ireland's global development partners, we see and hear of God at work every day as people's God-given potentials are fulfilled. We would love to share these individual stories, over 400,000 of them, each speaking of God's wonderful deeds. But for now, here are just a few.
We're just excited to be part of what God is doing through transformational education with open schools and with Teach Beyond. And we just want to say, God is good, and just to see the difference that is taking place in the lives of these children. And this is one of our classes with the children. I think they're from about 8 years old and up, and it's exciting to see how they are actually learning the letter B, and they already know the whole story of Billy and the ball, and they've demonstrated it. And it's great to see Annette and so many of the others just doing a phenomenal job. So this is the second class that they're busy with right now. And inside here we have another class, and this class is more the grown-ups. I say grown-ups, more the older ones, and it's exciting to see them also.
Okay, no, you go ahead.
They are such an awesome group, and in this village you just have the desire just to want to learn, to read and to write. Thank you so much. God bless you.
Definitely I feel the difference before and after. I can see that he has been learned how to communicate, and he's doing very well in communication. Now he's running the shop, receiving people, and also his ability in calculating things, and how to do accountings for himself, and how we manage things. So his personality has been changed. Fulfilling my mission in life of caring about my kids and having them successful. And my children are my top priority, especially Amjad and his sister. He has another daughter who has a hearing impairment and a speech impairment, and for me this is my first priority.
He had Paramis 3 classes: cooking, healthy food and sewing and also garden. I'm teaching the garden, planting organic, and I know I'm proud of it because I'm doing it. There are some grannies like that. I've got I don't know, about 80 grannies, but in different groups. Now I'm working here at Phakamisa. I full employed in 2010. Therefore, my family survive, hoping that my granddaughter will get job as she's got children. I'm happy with Phakamisa, although I'm old, but I can't do otherwise. I like to thank Phakamisa and the supporters of Phakamisa because we got some clothes here, second-hand clothes, sometimes bread, and also the money, although money can't be enough in everyone, but I'm happy about Phakamisa. Yeah, I'm happy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're a wonderful lady.
Thank you so much.
So we say thank you to World Development and Relief, to Paul and to Tim and to Laura. And Paul, I hope you quickly recover from COVID. It was lovely to see that grandmother there from Phakamisa in Pinetown. And I remember being there with Tim and others and having fun with those grannies and with the staff, splitting our sides in laughter with each other. And they had just such joy in their hearts in spite of all the challenges. So thank you for that. So we're coming now to the report from the Council on Social Responsibility. And the report begins on page 75 in our Reports and Agenda book, in our blue book. The report is there on page 75 and the agenda then on page 79. Secretary of Conference.
Thank you, Mr. President. Reverend Stephen Foster is going to speak first. Others will also speak, and we've given permission to Paul, Johnny and David, but beyond that we want to say welcome to them and thank you for sharing with us this afternoon.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just want to share some maybe familiar Bible verses with us from 2 Samuel, first of all, and this is regarding Nathan's prophecy to David, and just to quote that, there were two men in a certain town, one rich and the other poor. The rich man had a very large number of sheep and cattle, but the poor man had nothing except a ewe lamb that he had bought. He raised it and it grew up with him and his children. It shared his food, drank from his cup, and even slept in his arms. It was a daughter to him. And a traveller came to the rich man, but the rich man refrained from taking one of his own sheep or cattle to prepare a meal for the traveller who had come to him. Instead, he took the ewe lamb that belonged to the poor man and prepared it from the one who had come to him. Before I say anything else, don't anyone dare correct this Fermanagh man about how to pronounce the name of a female sheep. It's beyond Fermanagh as well. But this picture that Nathan spoke about, the vulnerability of this lamb, and we can use that and recognise that at work in society all around about us, and how the rich, the powerful, those who exercise just a particular power can leave many people very vulnerable, who are already vulnerable, worse off in society. And the poor, as with that man, hold preciously what they have, but maybe others don't appreciate in any way how precious that little that they do have is. And while maybe we could use that illustration to situations like maybe President Putin's power and maybe the suffering of ordinary individuals in Ukraine, but just bring it down to ourselves, how easily we can be blinded to injustice around about us, maybe because of privileges that we have, in our own lives or in society. And it's not just important that we're alert to injustices within society, but we must be prophetic. And being prophetic is a key part of who we are. It's part of the ministry of the church. And we need to be prophetic at all levels of our church in our society. It's important that we speak out when tragedies or other things happen within our society. And we found ourselves this year just speaking out at certain times when particular tragedies have happened in society. Within the Southern Executive, we have considered, well, should we only just be speaking out when maybe tragedies that hit the headlines happen, but there are tragedies happening all the time. So we do hold that and appreciate that. Could I just commend the 10 reflections on Christian social engagement in light of the war in Ukraine that is in the conference agenda, and it has tended to just cover a lot of the areas that we're interested in. But it's maybe interesting how this awful time has exposed some of those other issues. And so the challenge within that, to open up your homes, has been a challenging call made by our church. It reflects the practicality of giving our lives to Christ within a real world time and space. How we actually use our most valuable possessions speaks about where our hearts really lie. We commend those who have already housed Ukrainian refugees, those who have offered and await an outcome, but also the housing of all sorts of other people in challenging circumstances. And we know that there are Methodists who are practically helping others. That's just become apparent to me during this time. It's not just about Ukrainian refugees, but there are Methodists giving support in their homes to others who just need somewhere, for whatever length of time, somewhere to live. In the south in particular, housing is an enormous crisis. What was a sort of mostly Dublin issue is certainly a countrywide issue now. And then maybe just to highlight, certainly within the Southern Executive, we're alert at the moment to a bit of dangerous talk that is happening, maybe more so on social media than maybe in other types of media. The type of question, why should we house others when we can't even house our own? And that's a dangerous language and path. And housing is a complicated thing, or the reasons why housing is a crisis, at least in the south. But we need to recognise our responsibility for all. We are a place for refuge for others. We're a place of refuge for Ukrainians, but we are a place of refuge for all sorts of nationalities, those who may come from all sorts of other places. And may our country or our island or the states that we belong to, but may we as a people, as a church, continue to be at the forefront of providing a welcome and at the forefront of racial integration. I should note that we're, just as we think about the year ahead, certainly we're concerned in the Southern Executive, concerned for the rights and needs of traveller people, and we want to seek to listen well in regard to the needs of travellers this coming year. Just more generally, North and South, Gambling is something we really want to look at this year ahead, and so if there's anyone that feels of some particular experience or interest in speaking into that, please do let us know. In a moment we'll be focusing on the poverty issues. Just from a southern perspective, I just want to say something first. So Trussell Trust and Christians Against Poverty are UK-based charities, and so while maybe the Northern Executive has taken the primary lead in regard to the focus on poverty this year, this is a united focus for us all, and the things that we want to say are for everybody. But just to acknowledge that maybe in the Republic of Ireland we don't tend to have broad agencies that are generally Christian regarding this beyond being Catholic. And maybe just acknowledge that church members might be more likely to engage at a different level, so they might support the local St Vincent de Paul or other groups. So there are different ways in which maybe even churches or church members might tend to work. So we just want to acknowledge that there's some nuances, but this is a focus for us all. But of course there are other church ministries, not least in Carlow, Anton and others, and other places where people are responding to the practical needs through food banks and in other ways. So I think those are the main things that I need to highlight from our perspective in the South. So thank you.
And thank you to Stephen. Now that he has rounded up his yo's, it's my turn just to highlight a couple of issues from the Northern perspective, and then the bulk of our time is going to be led by Brian Anderson, and we're grateful for the permission for Paul and Johnny to participate in. We did ask permission for David Gallagher to speak, but he's not going to speak, believe it or not, but he's going to listen and he's going to keep some notes, and the working party that we've had on the poverty issue, I mean, I've been involved in it, but really David and Brian, together with Paul and Johnny, have been the main drivers. So I hope that will be interesting and stimulating for you. Once Brian has finished, Brian's going to round that up about 3 o'clock. That will give us 9 or 10 minutes in which to process the business and for you to speak to anything else that isn't. During the poverty discussion, there'll be a chance, you'll be asked questions, and there'll be a feedback within the way that that's planned. But if there are other issues related to CSR business, North or South, you will probably have a minute at the most. But if there are things that conference wants to say to us, of course you can communicate with us in other ways, as Stephen has said, and write or email, and we will hear those things. So that's the plan. The two things I want to make a brief comment on from the Northern perspective is, first of all, just to say that there's a lot of work been going on, both North and South, and 4 or 5 pages in the Blue Book really doesn't represent the breadth of that work from quite a number of different people. We do deliberately try to keep the report short because we recognise that there's more chance that you'll read 4 pages than 40 pages. And so just to give a flavour of the sense of the issues that we are wrestling with as a church. There are 2 things that have somewhat developed since I wrote the Northern section of the report I want to comment on very briefly. First of all, the Northern Ireland Assembly elections took place in May, and you know the outcome, and you know the stalemate that we're facing. And of course there are ongoing issues with regards to the protocol, with the failure to establish an executive and so on. I want to avoid stepping on any kind of political landmine and say very much, other than that we should be, as Methodist people and people of good will and good faith, whatever, we should be prayerful and supportive and encouraging. It's easy to criticise. Those who've been elected as MLAs have got a difficult task, and I hope that you will make some effort to contact your MLA, to be in touch with them, to support them, to offer them your encouragement and your prayers, so that perhaps, maybe sooner than we think, we will have some of these things resolved. The second issue I want to say just a couple of things about is the issue of legacy and reconciliation. In the agenda, I made the comment that as it was being drafted early in April, there's still no sign of the response from the Secretary of State with regard to legacy. And though there's been much speculation, I wrote, with the Assembly elections in May, few are expecting that the legislation will be tabled before the summer. Now, it's the beginning of early in June, and the legislation has come and has been through its second reading in the House of Commons. So things have actually moved at a remarkably fast rate. Now, some people, church people, have been involved. I'm very grateful that the church leaders met with the NIO. I was highly impressed with the Archbishop, the Anglican Archbishop John, when he told the NIO that he had read the legislation twice. It's 100 pages. I can barely confess to having read it carefully once, and my head was spinning. So there has been that engagement with the church leaders. There's also a working party within the ICC, the Irish churches, and I have been part of that, and I was actually involved in a Zoom meeting even while I was on holiday in Denver. I'm very glad that Damien, who's not able to be with us today, but was with us yesterday, scheduled it for 2 o'clock, so that was only 6 o'clock Denver time, so I was up. And that group has been focusing on that issue as well. And there will be further work on it. And our legacy stroke reconciliation working party, I'm hoping, will be able to meet on Zoom next week or the week after. And we will continue to wrestle with what is a difficult issue. I found myself saying at the beginning of that Zoom meeting the week before last, that it may well be that on this issue we will admit defeat, and the government have the numbers in Parliament to push through the legislation that almost everybody, not everybody, but almost everybody has serious questions about. And I found myself saying to the group, perhaps what we should focus on now is how we mitigate the harm that might be caused, particularly to victims and those who've suffered the most through the years of the Troubles. Others in the group then repeatedly picked that up, and perhaps that will be our focus. I'm only mentioning that not for discussion now, but perhaps if there are folks, and I know there's not very many of you perhaps who are really au fait with us or interested, but there are some, and I'll be glad to hear from you and to feed back through the processes that I've mentioned your thoughts and factor them into our own discussions. That's really all I want to say about those two issues. So I'm going to invite Brian to come and to lead the next half an hour or so of the business on poverty. And I hope that this will be instructive, challenging, and something that we will move forward together. I know we're going to shuffle a few of the party ups to the Paul and but Brian, thank you.
Thank you, David. Can we get a couple of chairs up here, please? I'll invite Paul and Johnny to come and join me once we get some chairs and a microphone. Sorry about this. Here they come. The estates manager is moving the estate. Thank you. Just one of them, I think. You guys can share that. On Thursday, the president of the British Methodist Church preached to the ministers who were here on the widow of Zarephath's story. And she made her points. It's a story based around a national crisis, a drought. And I believe we're living through a national crisis called poverty. Whether you be in Northern Ireland or the Republic of Ireland. This poor widow was poor by any stretch you'd want to think of. She had a little bit of flour, a little bit of water, and she's going to make something for herself and her son. God intervened through Elijah and made other requests of her, and things turned out well for her. And there's a metaphor there for us in terms of church working with the poor. But just think about that woman for a minute with me, please. Think about her in that conversation with Elijah. All I've got is, and what I intend to do is. And it was going to be, for her as she saw it, a gloomy outcome. Poverty strips people of choices. this woman had very little to look forward to. Those who are living in poverty are stripped of choice. Their outcomes don't look good. Thousands of people in Ireland today live in poverty. Why? Well, there's a myriad of reasons. The benefit system, the huge increase in the cost of living, being in an environment whereby your microwave breaking down or an electric appliance breaking down, all of a sudden you don't have something and you don't have the resources to replace it. I work in East Belfast Mission on the Newtonards Road, and two stories I'll share with you kind of encapsulated the impact of poverty. We as an organisation get food that is almost out of date from Marks and Spencer's. We collect it, we bring it down and we make it available to folks. Some of that is frozen food. And I was pulling together a little bag of food for a lady who has 2 children, is on the benefit system. Her landlord increased her rent just as he can choose to do, and all of a sudden the ends could not meet. Her financial budgeting, as limited as it was, all of a sudden was wrecked because a landlord decided to put a 15% increase on his rental charge, and he's allowed to do that. And as I was going around, I went to one of our freezers and I said, I'll put some frozen food in for you. She said, no, it's okay. And I began to wonder why, and then it dawned on me. She didn't have the resources to switch the freezer on. And then the saddest day of my experience in 4 years at East Belfast Mission was the day there was a queue of 7 people standing in a line waiting to have their gas and electricity cards topped up. And I stood and I looked at the lady who was number 7 in the queue, and I thought, what does it feel like to be number 7 in a queue to get £15 from an organisation to top up your gas and electricity? What does it feel like to stand in that queue? And I have to be honest, I wept. How have we created a society that people stand in a queue to get 15 quid to let their family function? What does life in all its fullness mean for a family going through poverty? And I'm sure in your situation and many situations, there are people around the corner from you, and that is their experience. Are we connecting with them? So CSR grasped this situation that we're going through, and we decided to partner with 2 organisations who really do cold-face work on the area of poverty. And so I want to introduce to you Paul from Christians Against Poverty, and then Johnny from the Trussell Trust. And if you would grab your mic, Paul, and just would you mind just introducing yourself and just saying a little bit about what CAP does?
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to be here this afternoon. It's a real pleasure to spend some time with you. I'm Paul Livingstone. My role is Partnership Manager for CAP, Christians Against Poverty, here in Northern Ireland. CAP is a UK-wide organisation, as has been referred to. We partner with the local church to primarily provide free debt advice to anyone in need. So we say we're the Christians. Our clients can be of all faiths and none. And everything we do is in partnership with the local church. We also run some groups to help people back into employment and to develop better skills, to better manage on a limited budget, and to equip people to manage their finances better. But our primary objective is to see people released from the burden of unmanageable debt, and we work with them through that journey, supporting them emotionally and practically while they take the best route for them out of debt and hopefully to a bit more freedom and hope in the future. So I'll pass over to Johnny.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. My name's Johnny Curry. I work for the Trussell Trust. It's great to be part of this partnership as well, so it's really great to be here this afternoon. The Trussell Trust is a UK-wide anti-poverty organisation that supports a network of food banks across the UK. My role is Northern Ireland lead. So we have two roles, really. One is to support our amazing network of local food banks within Northern Ireland, which are an amazing example of how community responds to need by providing sources of emergency food for people. The other part of what we do is we want to see an end to the need for food banks. We cannot have them institutionalised as part of a two-tier food system in our country. So our role as an organisation is to work ourselves out of existence where there's no longer a need for food banks.
And Johnny, just you hang on to the mic there, and would you just explain to us, what is Trussell Trust finding out there? What's the impact, or what's the need?
We recently did a bit of work around our end-of-year stats for the last financial year, and it's no surprise that food bank usage is on the increase across the UK. On a consistent basis, Northern Ireland sees the highest increases in parcel use compared to the rest of the UK. For the last financial year, the UK-wide increase was 18% since the pre-pandemic year. For Northern Ireland, it's a 36% increase, so it's incredibly high in Northern Ireland. We're increasingly finding on the ground that it's always low income is the main reason why people are coming to food banks. And we have a very strong process of onwards referral pathways, so that once people come to a food bank, let's see what the options are so they don't have to come back, whether that's through a referral onto CAP or to other advice services. But we're increasingly finding that there's only so much income you can maximise. People's income isn't matching their ability to meet their essentials, to feed their families and to heat their homes. So we're seeing that as an emerging trend. And also with the cost of living affecting everyone, we're starting to see on the ground from our food banks that stock levels on our food banks are starting to go down. Okay. When you consider how much food was around the system during COVID, when our food banks were heaving with donations, we're starting to see a trend where stock levels are starting to go down.
What, in your judgment, are the sort of three main causes of poverty in Ireland, Northern Ireland?
There are three main reasons why folks often have to turn to food banks that we see across the UK. And the first one is problems with the social security system. So it currently doesn't match the current level of inflation. So folks often turn to food banks because there's a problem with money that they owe to the government. So over almost half of people that are referred to food banks across the UK owe the government money, whether that's through social security overpayments that they're having to pay back, or they've been sanctioned, or they're having to pay back their 5-week loan while they're waiting for universal credit to kick in. So problems around social security. The second one is around just an emergency that could hit anyone, a family bereavement, ill health, job loss, some financial emergency where something breaks down. And the last thing is where just a lack of formal and informal support in the local community where people are based. As folks are going to food bank for the first time, they often don't know what other support is out there as well. So those three main issues are front and centre, but the main one is folks' income isn't matching all the things that they need to pay for to stay safe, healthy and well fed in their homes.
Thank you. Paul, if I can ask you now to think about this question. CAP stays with a family for whatever the agreed time is, but often that can be a couple of years. You journey with a family, maybe longer. What's the impact of poverty and debt on a family?
It's so widespread, and that's the really disheartening thing in some ways. Although our strapline is always hope, and we should have hope, but yeah, it's so widespread. So we're talking about, to echo a lot of what Johnny said, our clients also have, we're about to produce stats, and I think it's almost 1 in 3 of our clients here owe social security payments to the government, and that impacts on them. But in terms of the wider impact, it impacts on health, both physical and mental health. obviously if people are not eating enough or there's no heat in their houses, it's impacting on them physically. If they get up and move, they're less mobile. But also, particularly now, mental ill health is a massive issue. Sitting in a dark room without heat or light is just the worst thing that can happen to a person who's already feeling anxious or depressed. Sadly, our stats would show that in Northern Ireland, about a third, just under a third of our clients will have considered or attempted suicide as a way out of debt, which is just absolutely heartbreaking. It impacts on family life. One of the causes of debt that we see is that relationship breakdown leads to debt, but also debt leads to relationship breakdown. It can lead to arguments and strife in the home. That has an impact on children. A lot of our clients who are parents will report that they feel like bad parents. One, because there's maybe sort of stress and tension in the house, but also because they're not able to provide for their children. It also impacts on wider family. Clients cut themselves off from family, they cut themselves off from friends and will live in isolation. One of our clients we focused on last year talked about before the CAP debt coach came to her door, she didn't have an adult conversation. This is a parent with 3 children, but she didn't have an adult conversation for weeks sometimes because she was just isolated herself. So it has all those effects. It's health, it's family life, it's well-being. So it's much more than just owing some money. It's much wider impact than that, which impacts all aspects of life.
A phrase I have heard repeatedly over the last little while is, "It is what it is." It's kind of, there's no way out. This is what it is. This is life. It is what it is. What's the societal impact of poverty that you notice with Trussell Trust or CAP? What's it saying to society? What's the outcomes of poverty and the handout culture that we're living in? What's the impact on society?
I mean, I suppose you challenged us with that phrase at a conference we held earlier in the week, and it made me think. There is a certain, maybe an amount of resignation amongst us all. Prices are going up. We're all affected by it. And there was a phrase used during COVID: "We're all in the same storm, but we're not in the same boat." And that is so true. There are issues. Yes, when I go to buy petrol, I find it much more expensive. But thankfully, I'm in a position to be able to, with budgeting, to manage that. But there is that. The fear is, I suppose, that there's a sort of resignation and acceptance of the position, and there's a phrase used that people use: we other people. The danger, to my mind, as a society, we see the poor as a separate, almost a separate entity, but these are people who live in the street beside us, round the corner from us. They're not marked by a sign on their door. There could be people with 2 big cars in their driveway, or not. There's just, we can't stereotype and place people in a box. This is us. These are our brothers and sisters. These are our neighbours. These are our friends. These are our family. This is happening to us all. So I think that those would be my 2 points on that, Brian. That we can't see the poor as a separate culture almost, that's separate from us.
I think we do have a handout culture. It's not with the people that we serve, it's the people at the top of our society. For the folks that come into our food banks, we have a culture of social security levels. That just last year, when the universal credit uplift was scrapped, it was the biggest overnight decrease in social security payments since the end of the Second World War. And then in terms of wages for people who are in work and are still having to go to food banks, from 1992 to 2008, the sort of average wages rose by 24%. From 2004 until 2022, they rose 2.4%. So to some extent, we're all in this together. The folks that are often demonised about relying on benefits, they're our neighbours, they're in our churches, they're a part of our community. And the wider government narrative is still to divide us, between us and them. COVID hasn't ushered in a whole new age of compassion. A lot of those tropes and those cliches that are trotted out about people who are in the lower end of society are still there. And it's our role as a food bank charity, well, as a charity that supports food banks, and with CAP as well, to say we're all in this together. Food banks and the sort of debt support that we have to put in place now just isn't right for a society that is one of the biggest economies in the world. So we can't let the current cost of living crisis divide us into us and them.
And that universal credit decrease was how much a week?
It was £20 a week.
£20 a week. But the impact of that was the largest decrease in income since the Second World War. £20 a week. What would you do with 20 quid? All right? You get the impact, the difference, that the situation of £20 made such a difference. And so, you know, the lobbying to get our government, British government, to understand the impact of that needs to keep going and keep on rattling cages. So if you want to speak to your MLA about something, or your MP about something. So we joined together in this partnership between Trussell, CAP and CSR. We've produced a whole raft of resources. They're on the website, including interviews, lived experiences, and they're there for you to use in your churches. And that we'll continue to roll them out as this year goes on. And we've talked these two into doing another year with us, which is good. And we really appreciate their commitment they've given to us. I want to go over to you now. For 5 minutes, 5 minutes, in little groups, just gather around. There's 2 questions going to appear on the screen. There they are. What's your church's experience of poverty? And or, depending how time isn't great lengthy here, but how do we influence those in power to improve people's situations? Whichever question you want to deal with. And then we'll have a little sort of plenary session feeding that back. So what's your church's experience of poverty? And or how do we influence those in power to improve people's situations? Go ahead, folks. Have a wee yarn. Thank you. That's great. The benefit of having it. And Lindsay Conway. He's like, who used to be chair of the social council? couple of people, I'm trying to find them now. Make sure they're here. They're putting them in front. Well, the second one, I'll get David Kaplan to say something. And the first one, yeah. Where's the There's Phillips there. It's always a problem. Just a couple more minutes, folks, just to round your conversation up, please. Okay, can I ask you just to draw together into a plenary session, just all together? I think we have a roving mic somewhere. Hazel has one, yeah. Those groups that dealt with question 1, what's your church's experience of poverty? Is there anything that'd like to share from your conversation? Just put your hand up and we'll get Hazel to come and chat to you. Anything you'd like to share? Yeah, Karen?
Karen Spence, Newton Abbey Methodist Mission. In terms of the experience of poverty, it is huge. We, as a church, have always given fuel vouchers for those who are in need. They are referred to us. In this past week, we have given out £150 worth of fuel vouchers to people who are in need. There's the sustainability question for us in that as well. So yeah, I mean, it is huge, and it's the embarrassment for someone who comes to the office door. They're referred to us, but they come to the office door to receive that voucher, and it's kind of like, you won't tell anybody you've seen me here, and it breaks our hearts, as it rightly should do. So,
thank you. Yes, gentleman there with a green shirt.
James Archer, I'm from Ballynafeigh Church. I'm volunteering for Food Bank, Trust Food Bank in Ballynafeigh. I was just saying some of the figures on Friday, that's yesterday. There was 89 people came to the food bank, and we give out half a ton of food to people.
Half a ton.
It's incredible, considering that the food bank opened in 2014, and Peter Warallens, he was the director then, and he said he was sitting waiting for somebody to come, and the first person through, they got one voucher that day, and yesterday they got 27. That's 27 families and that's only the tip of the iceberg, because there are those who, I don't know what it is. It's like people who would accept poverty or charity, and they would sit in the house and starve rather than ask people to come. And it was noticeable, it was during the week there, and I was in, that we got one voucher from a minister of the church. I haven't seen too many of those. And I'm just wondering, how many ministers have people in their pews who need a voucher? Would they come to their minister and ask for one? Are they aware? Are they aware of who actually needs or are in need?
I think it's one of the questions we in CSR have struggled with. We give ourselves the word learn, act and pray as our three sort of targets that we were hoping to do, and we're not 100% confident that the people in the Methodist pews understand the impact or the availability of help with poverty. So yeah, thank you, James. Andrew?
Andrew Irvine, Belfast City Centre Chaplaincy, and also, when I haven't got my part-time minister's hat on, Chief Executive of East Belfast Mission. I want to address the second question: how do we influence those?
Andrew, I'm going to come to it. I want to just do the first question and then the second question. All right, sir? It's not often I get a chance to put him in his place, so I'm going to take advantage of it. Over here, it's just the first question. Elaine.
Thank you. I'm here as editorial secretary, Elaine Barnett. When I was working in Craigiehill Methodist, the Larne Trussell Trust Food Bank was set up, and I was at the AGM a couple of weeks ago, met Johnny at the AGM there, and in the 9 years since that food bank was set up, 10,000 people have received food in the town of Larne. That's adults and children. 10,000 people have received food. The referral system, the vouchers, as you've heard, that comes from Women's Aid, from social workers, from GPs, very few from ministers, but maybe ministers aren't the first person you go to when you're struggling with food poverty. I don't know. As well as the referral system, we had an emergency phone. And I remember one weekend it was my turn to have the emergency phone. And Women's Aid phoned me to say, could I take food parcels to this family? So, of course, we went with the food. And you talk about stories that stick with you. That lady had got a restraining order against her husband. He had been a very controlling man, had controlled all the money. And in that house on Saturday morning when we went, 3 children, sorry, I nearly choked thinking, 3 children were sharing the last sausage for their breakfast. And she had had an OXO cube. that is what she had been living on for 3 days, was OXO. So we gave her this food, and of course she was overwhelmed and so on. But the other thing I wanted to mention too was it's not just the emergency food for 3 days, it's trying to find this signposting to help them to support. In Larne, Trussell Trust and CAP work very closely, and it has worked really well. So I really welcome this kind of more formalising of the possibility between us as a church and the Trussell Trust and CAP. I think it's wonderful.
Thanks, Elaine. Andrew Docherty, I've sort of primed a couple of people, so Andrew's one of the people I've primed. Andrew, do you think, from your experience of Methodism and Methodist churches, do Methodists understand the level of poverty there is in our country?
Well, let me put it like this. I would be confident that all circuits in the Southern District and all societies would have some awareness of the issue of poverty. And indeed, as Stephen highlighted earlier on, many are wanting to help out. But I suppose my concern is that we have a limited definition of poverty, lack of money, but it's more than that, of course. And also we're not always aware of the causes, although thanks to our speakers for highlighting some of those causes. But it's more than lack of money. I mean, it's housing poverty, it's generational poverty, it's friendship poverty, and so on and so on. But I mean, certainly many churches are aware of the issue and are trying to help out.
One of the things we hope is that you'll take this message back to your circuits. We'll move on to the second question, and I'll get myself out of a hole. I'm very conscious of time, so just a minute, if you don't mind. Quick. Yeah, go ahead.
Janet Twigg from Waterford. I just wanted to add in, because I think it's really important that we don't actually know sometimes, looking at the people who are sitting in the pews beside us in church, as to who really is suffering from poverty. And just to say, I remember one Sunday morning in Sunday school, one of the little girls said to me, "I'm really hungry." And I said, "Oh," and you kind of pass it over, and she said, "I'd no breakfast." That's real poverty. That is, and then at Christmas time, going to visit some of these homes and bringing Christmas presents and realising that was Christmas for those children. So I think that's the poverty we're dealing with. That's the level we're dealing with.
So it's about relationship, knowing people, understanding who's with us in churches.
Being really aware.
Really aware. Move on to the second question. Andrew, do you want to make your response? I was giving everyone a minute. You can have a minute and 10 seconds.
I've learned over the last 4 years to be patiently persistent. That's the thing from this morning. Brian and I have been fighting another battle around a funding organisation in Northern Ireland which is refusing to channel public funds to faith-based organisations. And in that particular argument, you said to me in the office one day, Brian, the only thing that is going to change this is a court of law and a judge telling them that they can't do that. We have a government system in Northern Ireland which is simply not accountable. It's simply not, and we see it in a range of things, and we've had a number of public sector crises over the years, and we keep being told that's the last one, we've learned our lessons. And we keep coming back to more. Ballynafeigh Market and that poor vet from Dard being the latest. I honestly think the only way we're going to answer question 2 is when we find a way to hold individuals, and I mean individuals who have public responsibility, to account in a court of law. If that's a civil action, then it's civil actions, and it might have to be class actions on behalf of some of the people that we're describing today. And we have plenty of wealthy Christians in this city who could fund those class actions. And we hold individual people to account for sitting on £400 million while 3 children share a sausage. I think it's going to be a court of law is the only place. That's the history of politics in Northern Ireland. They will have to be made to be accountable.
Thank you. Anybody else? David Campton, would you like to say anything on the second question?
I suspect that Brian's asking me to speak because of a particular hobby horse that I have, and indeed a hobby horse that I've handed over to him to ride over the next little while in conjunction with a few others. There is a scheme that was developed largely through the auspices of faith-based leaders in Scotland that's entitled the Poverty Truth Commission that puts people with a lived experience of poverty into a space with politicians, business leaders, other civic leaders who have the ability to change policy and change minds. And it has had massive effects in Glasgow and in other parts of England as well, where that approach has been brought to bear. A number of us, including Johnny, have had discussions in a Northern Irish context about developing that kind of approach. It was initially included within a draft poverty strategy for Northern Ireland that was being developed, and Johnny again has been a primary consultant in the response to that. It slipped off the table in part of the process, but is being brought back in. I think I honestly do think that it's a policy that we need to really get behind. And if we're not able to get the momentum from a civic body to be the umbrella under which it sits, I think that we in the faith community perhaps need to step into the space to show that it can happen and that it can make a difference. It certainly did in Scotland, and I would like to see it making a difference now when a difference needs to be made.
Thank you, David. Anybody else want to make a contribution towards what was the second question? Johnny or Paul, any observations you want to make from what you've heard from the floor?
Yeah, 2 quick points in response. Brian, what people have been saying, thank you for sharing all that you've shared. And around what the church experience of poverty is, we are blessed, I think, that so many food banks are run by churches in this country. It puts churches in a very privileged position because you're uniquely placed to hear from direct voices of lived experience around what it means to live in poverty. As will some people in this room as well have had some experience of financial and economic hardship. Those voices of lived experience are the experts. They know what needs to happen. So things like that David has mentioned about those poverty truth processes, they're essential to policy change because it's the people that are directly affected who know what needs to happen. So all of our churches really need to commit to listening to voices of lived experience who are on our doorsteps and see them for the gift that is for our own learning. And the second point is around what we can do to challenge decision makers. And it was mentioned earlier on in terms of the victims and survivors and the troubles and legacy issues and how churches have spoken to that. Church leaders are still listened to in the public square despite the challenges that we sometimes face in terms of funding. It was mentioned by you, Brian, a couple of weeks ago at a meeting we were at around whenever it came to mitigating against some of the worst aspects of welfare reform in Northern Ireland, the voice and the things that church leaders said were vital in changing government policy. So we had some of the highest mitigations against the worst aspects of welfare reform here. It was confirmed to me a few weeks ago by a professor at Ulster University who'd said that if the church leaders hadn't intervened, that whole mitigations process wouldn't have kicked in. So in terms of a joined-up approach to poverty here, through an anti-poverty strategy like David has mentioned, that joins up all of the interventions that are all little fingers in the dike, they all need to be joined up and held accountable across government and across civil society, and the church's voice will still have sway in calling for that to happen. So I'd encourage you to keep that ask live and to build that momentum from the ground up.
Paul, anything you want to finally say?
The only, on a sort of slightly related but different note is just be encouraged. Elaine mentioned it, the relationship in Larne, just to use one example of a number of different churches coming together, partnering with Food Bank, who has a relationship with CAP, who both have a relationship with Women's Aid, who have a relationship with another community organisation, that there is some great work can happen when organisations partner like that, when churches look out into their community, see what's around them, and see where they can help people who are already doing great stuff in the community, where people from those churches can get involved in those organisations, not to take them over, not to empire build, but to work together. So be encouraged. There are some great partnerships out there, and there can be many more. If we look around, we see what's available inside our churches, we see what resources we have, and we see what's already going on, and we join those two things up. So, get in touch with your local Women's Aid, your local food bank, your local CAP centre, your local whatever, and see if you can help. And as a church body, when we're involved in that, we can see real difference and real change being made.
And one of the things we're thinking about is a challenge saying, Church Council, why don't you go to your local food bank? And, most of us have a trolley, and that's great, and I'm told that the food banks appreciate that. Church Council, why don't you just go and talk to the people who are running the local food bank? Finish your business early and go down, or a special meeting and go down, and just understand what's going on in the town and what you do. Maybe some of you have done that. Listen, time, oh gosh, I'm in trouble. Thanks to Johnny and Paul, big round of applause. And thank you for your engagement, David.
Yes, thank you again to those folks. I did, when I had a conversation with Heather Morris some months ago about the timetable for a conference, her opening gambit was that CSR business could take half an hour. I pleaded for at least an hour. She has been great, generous in giving us the hour. Now I'm going to try and be faithful to her and stick to that. I'm going to invite Lindsay Conway to come and share just a few very brief thoughts with us as the only kind of further contribution from the floor. So if you've got a speech ready on some other issue when I move the receiving of our report, will you please put it on paper and send it to me or to Stephen, and we will give it every due consideration, and though it's not heard on the floor of conference, it will not be ignored.
Mr. President, Mr. Lay Reader, Madam Secretary, it's my privilege to be here. Never did I think when I was coming to conference that I would be refreshed and renewed. I was coming to a conference and I was going to be bored, and I've heard it all before, and that's not what I found. So first of all, thank you for that. The next thing I want to say is you can have Charles anytime, okay? There is no transfer fee. I will actually give you his contact address. You can collect him anytime. But seriously, also could I thank Conference for allowing me to continue to serve God in my call in chairing the Safeguarding Board. That is appreciated. When I reflect, I retired in November as Secretary to the Presbyterian Council for Social Witness. And as I reflected over the last 3 days, the Methodist Church has played such an important role in that journey for me. And then I thought further. My first chairman was the late Dr. Eric Gallagher. And Dr. Gallagher had a profound influence on me, especially in the running and chairing of committees. I remember getting a message from him. He wanted to meet me before a board meeting, and I was secretary to what was then a review committee, and he says, Lindsay, stop telling stories, just take the minutes. And that taught me so much as life went on. And then I looked at the other parts of that journey. Heather, you and I first met on stress and ministry, and here we are discussing it again, and that must have been 15 years ago. Journey towards healing, and I'm not going to mention all the names because I'll forget somebody and offend somebody, but you know who you are because I've worked with you. There's been journey towards healing. There's been the whole safeguarding debate within the interchurch. There's been the Community Faith Forum. There's been the Street Pastors. There's been welfare reform, which I will come back to. There's Flourish, the Irish Council of Churches. All of those organisations that I have been part of and journeyed with my Methodist brothers and sisters over 19, 20 years. And it's only at this conference has it hit me that that has been so significant. Not that I would take Methodism for granted at all, but there it was. It was so significant. Johnny, you reminded us this morning that the mission of the least and the lost and the marginalised is what it's about. And if we go to the resource for conference, a commitment to live wholeheartedly will be seen. And the last bullet point is how we engage with wider society, which groans, waiting for God's justice and mercy to be poured out. That's powerful words in the context of where we are today. Charles would be devastated if I don't mention the book of James, because it's my mantra, and it was the mantra for social witness, and I think it is the mantra for social gospel. The chapter 2 talks about that relationship between faith and action. And the message puts it fantastically and gives us a freshness. God talk without God acts is outrageous nonsense. It couldn't be clearer. It couldn't be sharper than that. And Brian, as you described all of those things that your group has been doing, I mean, that just resonates with us all. I was part of that group, and thank you for the compliments of what we did in 2012 in this very hall with regards to welfare reform. We went off to Westminster. We met with David Freud, and we put our case, and we were the first group to be there. We were discouraged from going. It's a waste of time. What are you going to London for? And yet, what came out of that was this huge meeting in this very hall with the 4 church leaders, the Secretary of State, and our own ministers. And we started that journey. Sadly, Mr. President, we dropped the ball. We have dropped the ball over the years, and we now have that challenge. But there we are. I just thank you again for this experience at a time when I think we all needed that recharge of where did we get our influence from coming out of COVID? What were our key words? What were our key thoughts? What were our turn to passages of Scripture? And yet, from Thursday night onwards, we have been totally refreshed, totally renewed. And I leave conference today, hopefully a better person than I walked through that door on Thursday night. Thank you for your fellowship, for your friendship, and God bless.
Thank you very much, Lindsay. And if there's no transfer fee and you'd like to unretire, you're welcome to some of my job. Friends, I moved through the business very quickly. I moved the report number 1 without the permission for further discussion. So,
is conference agreed?
Then I have a 1A, which is the memorial that will have been in your order papers. That has been written for a number of reasons. One, just to emphasise the importance of the issue, which has been our discussion earlier, which I hope you have all found very helpful and stimulating. Also as a handy kind of press release, so Roy can give something of this issue to the papers, which perhaps they might pick up with. So without further discussion on it, I move the statement, the CSR poverty resolution that was on your papers, in your order papers.
Is conference agreed?
And please take that back to your circuits and share it with folks there, together with all the other material that will be in the newsletter and so on. And a grateful thanks to David Gallagher, particularly, who has written a number of the articles in the newsletter, which over the last month you'll have read, and there is more to come. Then number 2, and I'm grateful to Elaine for having worked out that the last Sunday in January is the 29th. I move those dates.
Is conference agreed?
And I think probably be for the Secretary move, but just with the amendment or the omission to note that we did omit the name of Bill Parkinson, which has been put back. The Secretariat are aware of that. How anyone could put a committee together and forget their treasurer is beyond me. But add the name of Bill Parkinson to that list, and perhaps the Secretary would move that.
Yes, happy to move that. Thank you very much. Move number 3.
Is conference agreed?
And that's me, sir. Thank you so much.
And thank you to you and to all of you as the Council for Social Responsibility, and those of you who have spoken particularly today. I'm getting tired of the tears in myself, and it's just so moving when we hear you speaking and when we hear those stories. And let's move the tears to action. So thank you. Much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. We now come to the conversation on the work of God, remembering that at 3:20 we have the vote for President Designate. So we're not going to be able to watch the video, but I'd like to call Mr. David Griffith to the podium to speak very briefly. David, very briefly, on the work of soulmates, or whatever the Lord has laid on your heart. Those brief words.
Mr. Lay Leader, Mr. President, Madam Secretary. My name is David Griffith. I'm one of the ambassadors for the youth at the Methodist Church, attached to the Secretary of Conference, which means that Heather and I are besties. I am thankful that I'm able to address you all. I remember the first time that I went up in response to Get Prayer from a prayer team at Soulmates just a few years ago. Since then, I have served on various prayer teams and been involved in prayer ministry across many age groups at Castlewell and Holiday Week, Autumn Soul, Soulmates, Lay Witness weekends, and on the streets of Ibiza and Belfast. I've prayed some weird and wonderful prayers with some weird and wonderful people. And always God has surprised me with what has come up. And yet, as I headed down to Lurgan this year to be part of the prayer team, in my arrogance, I expected it to be like the previous ones that I have been a part of. Surely nothing unexpected would come up. That week, a Christian friend, a Baptist of all things, and I were chatting about what I was doing that weekend. I said I was being part of a prayer team for Soulmates weekend, and after explaining that this was an event for children and not a dating service for the church, she asked, what does the prayer team involve? Do you teach children how to pray? Startled by the fact that I had to explain what a prayer team was, I quickly replied with, oh, no. The kids come up to us in our prayer partner pairs and ask us to pray with them about something. Maybe a difficult situation for a loved one, or in response to what the speaker has said. Oh, I've got a shaky leg. How quick I was to limit God. A few hours and prayers later, up came a young fella of maybe 9 or 10, all by himself. He sat down beside Heather and I and said, and we asked, how can I pray with you? And he said, can you tell me how to pray? Wow. What a privilege. Part of me does imagine that God is up there with his spectacular sense of humour, smiling down and saying, did I surprise you again, David? He's constantly smashing our expectations, and while he is always consistent, he is always revealing new things, no matter how long we have been in relationship with him. I pray that we as a church will never put him in a box, especially where children are concerned. Thank you.
And through you, we again commend the work of IMYC and all they do for our children and young people. We now come to the time for the vote for the President Designate. Perhaps, Secretary, you would lead us in this.
Thank you, Mr. Lay Leader. We're coming now to vote. The first thing I need to say are just some practical arrangements. If you are a member of the conference and you're sitting in the gallery, I'm going to ask you to come down, because if you want to vote, you need to be seated on the floor here. And the reverse also holds. If you're in the hall but you're not a member of conference, can you please either move to the back clearly or up into the gallery? So if folks could begin to move now, that would be very helpful. And just as that happens, a reminder that we vote by single transferable vote according to 714 in the Manual of Laws. There are 3 names on the voting paper, and those have been displayed through lunch for us. You can vote 1, 2, 3, just 1 and 2, but you put numbers beside the names, not just an X. So it's single transferable votes. You can vote for 1, 2, or 3, and you put a number beside the names. Voting papers will be distributed as soon as we're clear and happy that folks are in the room, so the scrutineers can begin to do that distribution now, sir. But those are all the practical announcements.
Thank you. When you get your voting paper, would you please hold it for a moment before you put a mark on? I would like to pray first before you vote. But I'll wait for a minute or two for the voting papers to be given out now, please. If you have not yet been given a voting paper, would you please raise your hand? Yes, go ahead.
And just as those voting papers are being completed, when the time comes when we've prayed and cast our votes, then there are little voting boxes that will be passed along, and you will simply pop your paper into one of the boxes. But the scrutineers will guide us on that, Mr. Lay Leader.
Right. Let's take a moment, please. Let's pray. Father, we ask that you would still our hearts, still our minds as we consider the names before us. Give us spiritual discernment to seek your will in this situation and to know what is right for this branch of your church. To choose someone who in a year from now will be your choice to lead our church. Speak, Lord, for your servants are listening. And when you're ready, please vote. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Please remember that at 3:45 we have the servants of remembrance for deceased ministers, and we don't want to start any later than 3:45. So please be back promptly at 22. Thank you.